And it fell out?
Never had that happen before.
Ever?
Never.
Never happened before.
You've got to at least have 3 or 4 that you've got to flog out of.
So this is probably one of the best ones we've ever pulled apart, I think, because normally when you drill the spots out, it won't just fall out like that. You've got to flog it pretty hard with a chisel to get it all out. So I don't know, I reckon this bonnet was replaced somewhere down the track, so it was from the parts shelf rather than the original bonnet. Whether that's got anything to do with it, I don't know. But if you look at the underside, if you look at that, you'd think, why did I take it off? But when you look in here, all this rust in here would be all trapped. So if you blasted it, then that rust is going to remain down the track. That's probably going to come back and haunt you. So there, another one there, another one there. And this here is where the bonnet's been pushed back up against the hinge and has actually cracked the spot weld. Righto, so all the brackets are off, so it's ready to go to the blaster, but not quite, because if you send it to the blaster with all this on it, then you're going to have to pay him to take that off, because when he goes to blast it, the blaster will just ride over because of it's like a rubberized thing. So do your blaster a favour and yourself a favour and clean that up for him, and that'll make it quicker, cheaper, and a better job. Once you get all those bits and pieces cleaned up, it's time to get it off to the blaster then. So my preferred option is to use garnet. So it's a dry blasting process with the red garnet. And my guy looks after me pretty well with that and does a good job. Once all that comes back from the blaster, I hang it up and give it a good blow off with the air. Provided you can get to this within 4 to 12 hours, it's the ideal scenario. You can just paint straight over that with no other prep. I'm using PPG Vibrance Epoxy Urethane primer. I find it very, very good to work with. So a couple of coats of that, and then we'll be able to put all those brackets and all back on. So once that's done, we move on to the skin. So with a heat gun, we're just removing all that sealer. The sealer is the one that causes the problems with the rust. So the next phase is to paint strip it, work your way around, and you'll see once we get with the stripper, you'll see that the sealer leaves a fairly rusty area. It tends to eat into the metal, so that's it there. The process now is to get in with the strip disc and use that on the grinder. Once again, trying to limit the amount of heat we put into the skin, but we need to get all that rust off. And then once we sort it out with the disc, we then go onto the wire wheel. What we're doing now is Darren's just going to show you what we do around the edges. So we use these wire wheels to get the bulk of that rust in the hard area, and then I'm going to put the gel in later. And then over at the front edge there, which has always got a lot of rust, we'll wire wheel that out as well. So the reason we're going to wire wheel this and not sandblast it is this doesn't create a lot of heat, and I'm trying to make sure I don't get any warpage. So this is a really good skin, so the least amount of damage I do to it while we're doing this. So make sure you support it while you're doing the wire wheeling. And if you've got a tiny blast, you could probably do it, but we don't have the facilities for that here, so we just wire wheel it out. So that's some factory, that's what I'm talking about heat. That's actually quite warm. You've got a big glove on, but I've got bare hands on. You see there, that factory sealer, you've got to get all that out, because that's going to always hold the moisture. So you'll see here there's a couple of really deep ones. On this, what appears to be deep ones on here, that's normally what's sort of light, and in a lot of cases they're rusted through. This is a really good bonnet, and unfortunately it's mine, which is a bonus. But normally across that front edge, quite often we've got to replace some of that. So Darren's going to get the rest of that out, and then we're going to tape it up and put some gel in it, and I'll show you how we do that. Righto, so I've had this rust remover on here for a few hours now. So this stuff I only just started using. It's a biodegradable and a super non-toxic blah 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 rust remover, and it's reusable, so it turns black once it's eaten the rust, but you can pretty much just scrape it off, put it back in the jar and use it again until it loses all that nice blue colour. So you can see there where this was all rusty, and water baseless stuff as well, which is interesting. So just a bit of Scotch-Brite on there, and it comes up pretty darn clean. So that's just about 3 hours, and where it's a bit heavier, we'll just run a wire wheel over that. Righto, so I've wire wheeled all the back of that out properly now, and I forgot to video it, so you'll have to have a look at the after job. But so we've taped up all the holes and now filled that up with the gel, and that gel now will eat out what's left, and yeah, that sort of heavy rust. And you can see this one here, I'll do this one as well. So the other side started off like that, and after the gel ended up like that. So this has been sitting about 4 hours now. So I'll just tip it up and get it out. And this stuff is reusable, so I'll save that and put it back in a container. Righto, so we're back on the panel van bonnet again. So in the last episode we actually stripped this, and then what we're showing you now is how to clean it all up and get it organised. And we've taken the inner panels off through here, so the support panels. They look like this. So we've taken those off because they're all assembled in bare metal, and we've now epoxy primed those, and we're going to weld those on in a minute. But just before I do, have a look down in here, Darren, you'll get down close there, you'll see that the stretch marks there, what happens is when that's sitting underneath, when the hinges get a bit tight or someone forces the bonnet back, it tends to bend the frame. So in a lot of cases we have to repair those. Some guys will extend that a bit. I don't normally do it because I think the factory sort of have what they worked out. As long as the hinges don't jam up, they're normally good. And then the other piece is this one. So it's your lock panel, same deal, rusty underneath if you don't do them. That goes back up under there, so we'll weld that in a minute. But just before we do, I'll just hammer these up, make them nice and flat, and then we'll weld them up. Lucky I've got my ear protection on. Just a nice flat dolly underneath. And then there'll be a few other bits, stuff like this, I'll go around and fix once we weld these in, but that's obviously add a little bit of a pressure on there as well. And then I'll go around and check, make sure there's no dents before I put the skin back on. So this is an area that had a fairly substantial pressing mark from the factory. Now normally if I'm doing a resto I'd leave that in place because it's the standard from the factory, but because it's from a van, it's going to look factory, but I want it to be a bit cleaner, so I'm just hammering that out. I thought I'd better get a shot of it. And then all these other ones are quite sharp. You see here the pressing, how it sits up. So my plan is I'll run around with a file and clean all those up. Saves my fingers in the rubbing process, but also makes for a much cleaner, neater, as always says, the finer details. So I'll give that one a bit of a tap as well. Okay, so we've clamped up underneath with that panel, so we're just going to clean those out with the wire wheel. This poor old wire wheel's nearly worn out. So when you do these, you need to have it nice and clean. You'll see other times we use like a weld through primer, because it's all epoxy, and this epoxy actually really good with the heat. So this is the Vibrance epoxy urethane primer. And the process now to plug weld these is to try and my welder's pretty old. It's an old Transmig 140, which I think my dad bought when the MIGs first come out. We had it serviced once, something went wrong with it. But it's only 140, so we normally do it on about 4. You need to make sure you're getting it nice and molten, and start in the middle so that you've actually got a good strong weld onto that under panel, so that when you're actually doing it, you need that penetration, so that you're trying to emulate a spot weld, but effectively you're trying to make sure that those have got a good clean weld. So Darren's just getting himself set up there now. Don't forget to make sure your tip's nice and clean so you're getting good gas flow, and you've got your gas turned on, of course. I don't know that we have a planned session. If I was doing this, I'd start from the inside and work my way out so it doesn't actually create any sort of pressure anywhere. Just do one, Darren, just the first hit so we can see where we're getting the penetration in the middle. It's got a good spot there right onto the metal on the back, so that we've actually got a weld on there, and now we're just going to try and create some heat and so plenty of heat, plenty of penetration. Now we can grind that up. Just something to remember when you're doing your MIG welding, that the gas side of things just wasn't real clean. Now we just changed the bowl yesterday, and obviously the gauge got knocked. But if you're trying to do nice clean weld, didn't have enough gas here. See how black it is? And then when I checked when Darren's welding, it was actually dropping down to about 8 or 12. So now set it up to 18, it's dropping back to 15, where roughly where I like to have it. I don't know what the book says, but that's what we normally run it at. So when we drilled out the skin for this with the spot welds, just a couple of those went straight through. So we use a bit of copper strap. I think by memory this is like off a buzz bar out of a 240, you know, like an industrial fuse box that I scored somewhere. So it's about 3-4 mil thick solid copper. You put that in from the back and then weld up against it. That saves a lot of cleanup on the inside and makes it a lot easier to weld. Like that. And then the same with these, where these ones are really deep. I have no doubt it's probably going to come along there now and weld some of those up as well. So you can see that one there. So you're probably asking why we're doing all this welding after we painted the thing with epoxy. Once they're been sandblasted, if you leave them any more than about, I don't know, ideally 4 to 6 hours, they start to rust again. So the idea is to get a good solid coat on so they don't rust, and then do your work, and then you'll see shortly where we actually give it a sand, fix any dents, do all the file of the edges, and then it'll get another coat of epoxy, and on the inside epoxy and primer, so that I can rub that down so that we can then give it a coat of colour. So they're all cleaned up now, so Darren's just given it a scuff up with some 120. We'll go over the whole thing now and look for any dents, probably a little bit of 240, just to chase them out, and then I'll hammer those up. So now that one side's done, it's on the inside. You can see there the penetration from those spot welds. Now we'll just give this whole thing a 240, and then provided I've got all the dents sorted out from the other side, should be able to give a coat of wet on wet epoxy, and then some environment high build primer, and then I'll rub that back and give it a coat of the green, and we'll get a good look at that new colour, see what it looks like. So all these pressings have got like a sharp edge on them, just where the dies come through. So I'm just going to go around with a little file. I think these might actually be a chainsaw file, and just take that sharp edge off. So when I go to paint it, it should look really good.